how was it coming to terms with the fact that your life would be micromanaging a condition, for the rest of your days?
I think initially, like, mate, it was so tough. The first, like, when I got the news at first, it's like shock. You just can't believe it's kind of happening to you, because you get to the age of, like, I was 21, 22. You think, like, you're invincible, at that age. You really think that nothing serious in terms of medical issues are going to happen to you. I guess my whole perspective of the world was even different back then. But, like, at 22, I was not thinking of any chronic disease. You think chronic disease hits you when you're, in your elderly years. You think it's something that happens with aging over time, but type 1 diabetes can happen to anyone at any time. And, CF, like, it can happen, right? So the shock of, like, okay, so you're telling me, I'm 21 and I have to inject insulin every day for the rest of my life. It's like, no, this can't be what my life's going to turn out to be. So there was shock and, like, denial, all of those, like, stages of grief, basically. And it was dark. Like, I reckon it was 6 to 12 months of, I spoke to my dad and mum on my own podcast the other day, and they said it was more like 2 years, but I think I've lost sight of what was going on back then, because it's just a bit of a blur. But, according to my parents, it was 2 years of, and I want to be careful not to use the word depression too, like, fleetingly, but depressive symptoms or sadness or grief, or maybe it was depression. I don't really know, but it was a dark time for a couple of years.
Can I ask what you were somewhat mourning during that period? And maybe it's hard to put your finger on it exactly, but is it the loss of what you thought your life would be as a young, healthy man at the time? Is it coming to grips with the fact that doctors are sitting you down and saying, hey, your life expectancy could look differently? Like, kind of paint that picture as best as you can.
Yeah, all of the above. It was mourning the loss of, those golden years in, like, my 20s. So, like, finished school to university years, like, I was playing music full-time, like, not full-time, but 3 or 4 nights a week I was playing gigs.
What do you play?
Like, singer-songwriter, acoustic guitar.
Oh, wow.
But I was playing all over Sydney. I signed with, like, a big modelling agency in America, and they, like, flew me out, and then I had a modelling agency in Sydney, playing sport at a decent level, and, feeling like I was just I was in the prime of my life. So it was the contrast between that and also, like, about to get my degree as an exercise physiologist. So, like, everything was coming together. I had my academics, I had all of these fun things like the modeling and the, sport and music. And then it was kind of like this out of the blue diagnosis. So it was the shock of, well, is that over for me? Like, am I still going to be able to do any of that? And then it was the conversation around the long-term complications and quality of life going forward, which was a pretty grim conversation, right? So the first scary things that I was told by the educator was, if you don't control your diabetes long-term, you can, lose your sight, kidney, disease, and essentially your kidneys stop working, neuropathies. So, like, the nerve endings essentially stop working, and you lose feeling in your feet, and you might have to get your limbs amputated. Like, mate, I'm 21 years old and I'm hearing this and I'm thinking, okay, so all of those great things that made my life so amazing and worth living are now gone, and I could just see a future of just poor health. So I think that was the reason why I was in that depressive state. It was like, I just lost all the good stuff. I can only see the bad stuff ahead. And I hadn't learned anything about this condition. I didn't know what type 1 was. I didn't know how to manage it. So I was just so lost, because when you're sort of sent back home after you've been in that clinic environment, it really is up to you to learn how to manage this condition. No one's doing it for you. And knowing nothing about it, it was really hard to figure out, how do I keep my blood glucose in range? How much insulin should I give? If you give too much, you can go into a coma and die. If you don't give enough, you're going to be high, and then you've got those risks of the long-term complications that I just mentioned. So it was just, the whole picture just looked so grey. Like, I couldn't find any positivity. And then there were a few moments that, we can talk about later if you want, but, there were some moments where I really got this, feeling of empowerment and hope, which transformed my mindset, like, immediately.
Talk to me about that now. Like, what were the moments for you that opened your eyes? Because, for some people, like, I know I've had some amazing conversations with people in the cystic fibrosis space over the last few years, where it just takes seeing that one person who is doing well in spite of the challenge, and you go, hold on, there is a possibility out here outside of the realm of what I had ever known for myself. And that's something to look towards and move towards. Or, maybe it's they kick some kind of challenge themselves and it's like a new sense of ownership and agency in yourself. And you're like, hold on, I'm capable of this. So what was it for you?
Yeah, I think the key word is agency. So, and for me, this moment came really quickly, which was amazing because I was literally the day after I was diagnosed, pretty much. So I'll paint the picture a little bit. My diagnosis was not as common as other people's. So a lot of people are diagnosed as, let's call it younger kids who are sort of rushed to hospital in a state of ketoacidosis. So they may be unconscious at that point. They've lost consciousness. They've got so many ketones in their blood that they're acidic and their body's like shutting down like rapidly. So it's like ambulance, get to hospital, get them on insulin straight away, get the glucose and ketones down.
Can I ask, is that a product of them going high or low?
High.
Okay.
Being so high for so long unknowingly.
Okay.
And for kids, it's extra difficult because, think about when you're a kid, right? And let's say you've got undiagnosed diabetes, right? So this immune attack is occurring. Your pancreas is no longer working. Every time you eat, your blood glucose is going up. And then that causes you to be really thirsty. What do kids do? They reach for juice and Coke and soft drinks. And then they're putting more sugar into the system that can't tolerate it. So they're treating their thirst with sugary drinks that's making the diabetes management impossible. Blood glucose goes up and up and up and up. And it gets to the point where, you're on your way to hospital, right?
So what would a sign for, say a parent sitting here listening and they want to educate, I'd be surprised if we've got any like 12-year-olds listening to the show, but there's certainly younger people who do. What would a sign of your blood sugar going high be?
Like an acute blood glucose elevation, there's basically very little signs.
Okay.
But if it's chronic enough, long-term enough that it's been, say, high for weeks or months, right? Because like one day of high blood glucose, like I could let my blood glucose sit above 20 for the whole day. I'll have some minor symptoms, but nothing that would stop me functioning. Like I could sit and talk to you, I could go to work, I can go to the gym, I can function.
Yep.
But it's for months and months and months is where the problems occur. And the main signs, and they're common. There's probably like 4 buckets. Number 1 is thirst that is unquenchable, right? And it's all the time. So during the day, you're waking up in the middle of the night, you just can't drink enough. And everyone who's been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes will tell you that you find yourself drinking all day long, which then makes you want to go to the toilet all day long. So that's the second bucket, right? Okay. So you're drinking a lot and you're urinating a lot. And the urination is like twofold. It's because you're drinking so much, right? But it's also to try flush out the glucose that's been building up.
Okay.
That's why you're drinking, right? So you're trying to flush the glucose out with the water and, through the kidneys, get rid of that. And then because you're drinking so much, you're peeing a lot and then your blood glucose is high, which is it's just a cycle. On that note, you're also probably really hungry and losing weight. So exactly what you said, like eating the entire fridge, but losing weight, right? Because the nutrients are not getting into the cells because insulin is that key that allows those nutrients and calories to actually enter the body and be stored. So without insulin, you can't store those calories. So you just like rapid weight loss, basically. And then tiredness and exhaustion, like beyond what's normal. Like everyone gets a bit sleepy, but when you have undiagnosed diabetes, it's like the lights can go out at any moment.
Yeah, wow.
So you're just so tired, for obvious reasons. And that was one of the things for me is I fell asleep driving my car, like many, many times. Like, when you're, like if you're on a big road trip and you've had like very little sleep, you can expect to have like a little micro moment where you're like really sleepy. But for me, it was that every day. Like just could not stay awake. And there was a moment, I've spoken about this a lot, but there was a moment where I was sitting doing an interview with somebody for a job at a hospital down the south coast in Sutherland. The position was for an exercise physiologist, and I was actually doing my accreditation. So I needed to sit across from this guy, and he was going to take me on board as the like the intern EP to go into the cardiac rehab ward. And I was sitting like this, having a conversation, and I was like falling asleep, like one-on-one.
Yeah, wow.
Right, like if you're in a uni lecture, you can like hide your dozing off, but face to face with someone, you're in trouble. So, I was falling asleep driving, falling asleep talking to people face to face. So those are the main signs that parents can look for.
Yeah, wow, mate. It's interesting because I wonder, how do you then, without people having to get glucose tolerance tests and wear a CGM around, how do we bring practices into medicine that allow us to pick up cases of type 1 diabetes earlier?
Well, I think like education around the signs and symptoms is, one good step in the right direction. And because those 4 things come together usually, it's pretty clear. If you see that your kid is drinking nonstop, peeing all the time, falling asleep and losing weight, yes, there's overlap with other conditions. And yes, those are things that people do day to day anyway. But the intensity and the degree to which people experience them when you're undiagnosed, it is quite obvious when you know what to look for. If you don't know what to look for, it's bloody impossible. But then, there's, as you mentioned with the CGMs, it's not like you're going to slap a CGM on every kid and hope you're going to die, right? Yeah. So it's like, I think that, we need to take a lot of care with, is there a way to pre-screen? Maybe there's certain like blood markers, like when you do blood tests, if you've got a family history of type 1 diabetes, checking the autoimmune antibodies when they're young, maybe. But the problem with that is, and this goes a bit deeper, is not all people with like antibodies to their pancreas develop type 1 diabetes. So if you're giving parents or a child news that, hey, you've got these antibodies for type 1 diabetes, imagine their psychology and their mindset thinking, when am I going to get it? Like, it's quite scary to live thinking that your fate is a diagnosis at some point. So I think that there's like ethics involved with even pre-screening. Like I wouldn't want to know. Like I wouldn't have wanted to know, because that's exactly what happened to me. I was told, because we caught it early, because I was falling asleep. I called my parents. I'm like, guys, I am not right. There's something going on here. And there were other things too. Like, my parents are doctors, so I knew that they would help me and put me in contact with the right people. But so, falling asleep driving and falling asleep in job interviews, that was my first like huge red flag. Then there was a moment where I was working in this physiotherapy, again, like a clinic to get my accreditation. And like I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and I like did a double take as how skinny I'd gotten. So, I had these like moments that kind of woke me up to this, and I spoke to my parents and I said, we need to do a blood test, right? And we did the testing, and one of the things that came back were these antibodies. But the diabetes clinic said, just because you have these antibodies does not mean you're necessarily going to get type 1, right? It means that there's something immune going on. You may get it in 5 days, you may get it in a few months, you may get it in a few years, or you might not get it at all, right? But that's like that message, that's hard to deal with, because then I'm just thinking my fate is for this diagnosis. But imagine if it never happened to me. I would always be thinking, living every day going, when am I going to get it? When am I going to get it? So I think we got to be careful with how we screen. I don't think there's an easy answer, to be honest.
No, there never is with this stuff, right? I think I interrupted you before when you were talking about the first glimmer of hope.
Yeah, okay. So I get the antibodies back. I get a couple of other blood markers that were a little bit elevated in this initial blood test. One of them was a marker called the HbA1c, which people could say A1c, which is, the long name is the hemoglobin A1c, which is basically a marker of your 3-month average blood glucose control. And mine came back not in the diabetes range, but pretty borderline, like abnormally elevated for somebody, of my age and how, sporty and athletic I was. So you would think that's a bit of a red flag. We need to look into that. And then, because my dad had this ties to this diabetes clinic, because he's an eye surgeon, he worked with them very closely. He took me there, and they said, you really need to monitor your blood glucose every day for the next 10, 14 days. These markers have come back looking a little bit that you're at risk for developing type 1, but just monitor your blood glucose. So they send me home with this finger pricker, basically. Prick your finger, get a little drop of blood, and put it onto the test strip so you see your blood glucose. I'm sure you probably did that when you were a kid.
1,000,000 times,
right, exactly. So they send me home with that, and I do it every single day. When I wake up in the morning, after all my meals, random times of day, before I go to bed. And for the most part, my control was normal. There was no numbers that were concerning until about, a couple weeks into doing this experiment. I see a morning blood glucose that was a little high, and it like kind of freaked me out. But they told me that each machine has a degree of error, sometimes up to 20%. So I'm thinking, it's the error. It's accounted for by the 20% error. So I checked it again, and it was still elevated. I'm thinking, okay, I hope it's the error. Long story short, we go back to the clinic, and I show the educator my logbook of like all of these readings that I've taken. And back then it was like pen and paper. So I'm writing down 7.3. That was the morning one that kind of freaked me out. And because they said to me, if you see anything above like 5.5 in the morning, come back to the clinic. And so I got that 7.3, and I think the next thing I did, it was like 7.7. So it started to look like it was trending up. And I went into the clinic and I said, is it possible that there's error with this? Is that reading wrong? And she's like, it's very unlikely, but she was kind of, trying to be gentle. She's like, I can go get a new one if you want. We just got some new ones dropped off. My dad was with me. And I'm like, yeah, 100%. I'd like a new one that actually works because that one's broken. That was my mindset. So she comes back with a new one and she pricks my finger, and she just, like, the color just drew out of her face. And I just saw her look at me like straight face, and she's like, I'm afraid to tell you have type 1 diabetes. Because she diagnosed me on that finger prick, the very first one of that new machine that she was testing. My blood glucose was like 16 or 17.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I caught it so early that I didn't have, the rushing to hospital. I didn't have to go through any of that stuff. But I had the shock moment of face-to-face with this, educator, with my dad next to me, who, mate, think about, like, from his perspective, he'd seen, decades of complications in people with diabetes as being an eye doctor. Losing sight, trying to restore it. So, yeah, like, that was a tough moment for both of us. And then I was sent home. And this is where sort of the hope, thankfully, enters the story really quickly. So I was sent home with, again, the device to prick my finger and check my blood glucose, but I wasn't given insulin. So usually you'd be given insulin almost immediately. But because it is such a dangerous, and you probably had this same conversation with your doctor around insulin being dangerous. If you overdose, you can get in some serious trouble. You can literally die if you overdose. So I wasn't given insulin, and my objective was basically to monitor like 7 days or 5 days or whatever it was. I can't remember. It was a long time ago now, but it was a few days of blood glucose readings, and then come back in and we'll give you the insulin and we'll teach you how to use it so that you can control these trends and patterns that we detect in those 3 days, right? So the next day I wake up and my sugar's high because it was 16 the day before. So I woke up and it was still about 15 or something. And then, I was told to just go through my daily routine so we can collect data. So I did everything I would usually do. I wake up in the morning and I had some breakfast, and, my breakfast meal spiked my blood glucose. And I can use the term spike because it was like a straight up spike. I went to I think it was high 20s, right? So I'm nearly at 30 millimoles now. And then I went to the gym, which was the next thing that I would usually do. And that gym session was that moment, unknowingly, that literally changed my course, physically, mentally, psychologically, everything changed in that moment, because I went into the gym with a very high blood glucose, and I did a workout where I put to rest basically all of that stress and anxiety that I was carrying around diabetes, and I just put it into working out, moving my body, getting a good sweat. For me, the gym's just my happy place. I can I'm not thinking about anything about life when I'm in the gym. When you're under a heavy barbell or you're bench pressing, you're not thinking about your worries. You're just moving the weight. You're just feeling the workout. So I had this great workout, and then after the workout, I checked my blood glucose, and mate, it was back to normal. I couldn't believe it, because I wasn't told at that point that exercise could be this sort of tool that helps to regulate blood glucose. I mean, it was my first day after being diagnosed. I barely even knew what type 1 diabetes was. So I had this moment where I'm like, okay, so you're telling me that what I just did there did the same thing that insulin can do, which is bring your blood glucose back into range, but all I had to do was move my body and work out. So it was like this massive moment of empowerment and hope and positivity, because it was the thing I loved doing anyway. and it was good for me. And now, like, you always know exercise is good for you. Everyone tells you, make sure you exercise, it's good for you. But I had this proof. I had objective data. I had literally brought my blood glucose back into range. So that was just such an incredible moment. And let me just add something in there. I'm not saying that it's a replacement for insulin. I'm just saying that it was my first time understanding that exercise can also reduce blood glucose levels.